Hi everybody, this is Karun Chandhok in Austin, Texas in the morning after the Grand Prix. What a fairly dramatic weekend it's been, and a fairly, well, it's just been a mad weekend really. We had wet weather starting off on Friday, lots of stories in the paddock, Brendan Hartley making his debut, Carlos Sainz at Renault, can Lewis win the World Championship? And then there was all this stuff about the whole new format to the weekend on Sunday morning, which was going to really shake things up in terms of grid procedures for the teams, for the drivers, the TV broadcasters, the fans. So there's a lot of stuff going on this weekend, but ultimately the biggest story's got to be the one on track. So let's start there. So unlike my normal columns, I'm going to skip the guys in first and second and come to the debate for third place, because Max Verstappen pulled off, I thought, an amazing overtaking move on the final lap, 2 corners to go on Kimi Raikkonen, and obviously he got the penalty. Now, let's talk about that. Fundamentally, yes, if you look at that on an individual case, Max had all 4 wheels of the white line when he passed Kimi, and that deserves a penalty. That's a slam dunk. There's no debate about that. Where the debate and the issue lies is that there were several other instances during the race where drivers left the track and overtook, and they weren't penalized. Bottas in turn 1, actually Sainz on the Force India as well. Technically, he left the track to set himself up for that move. And then, there's also things like through qualifying, turn 19, they're all driving off track. Turn 9, I think at the top of the hill, the left-hander, they're all driving off track. So to me, fundamentally, if you're going to turn a blind eye to these sort of things, then you've got to do it across the board. You can't selectively penalize people. And I think that's where the issue is. Personally, I don't have an issue with Max himself being penalized, but then you've got to penalize everybody. If you're not going to penalize any of those people, then in Max's head, the precedent has been set through the weekend that you're allowed to have all 4 wheels over the white line, and therefore he did that move. So it's a very mixed message that is being sent to the drivers, and for years we've banged on about these track limits things. I absolutely hate it. I think we should have 5 or 5.5 meters of real grass on the edge of the circuit. You should have the track, the white line, a bit of the curb, and then 5 or 5.5 meters of real grass or gravel, which is a deterrent. And therefore, we won't have these debates. We won't have these discussions. If Max chooses to put 2 wheels on the grass to pass Kimi, that's a risk he's willing to take. And if he does it, it's a spectacular overtaking move, like in the old days. So I think there's a fundamental issue here, which is larger than just what happened this weekend. Going forward, I would like to see clear consistency applied, across when they're issuing the penalties, because I think that there's too many grey areas here. The fact, I thought it was wrong that drivers weren't penalised for turn 19. In free practice 3, Lewis set the purple sector 3, which is the fastest sector 3 of anybody, by driving way off the track into the runoff area at turn 19, which is ridiculous, really. So, yeah, I think that's where this issue lies. It's a bigger problem to resolve, because obviously the circuits have invested a lot of money over the past few years putting in these tarmac runoffs. They're not cheap to do, high grip asphalt across the board. But it's really time that somebody took a stand at the FIA and said, right, we need to deal with this. It's creating more problems than they're resolving, and it does need to get resolved. So on to the rest of it. Hamilton in imperious form this weekend, right from Friday morning. Really, he looked like he was just so hooked up around the circuit. And when it came to Q3, he's just on such another level at the moment. I spoke to some people at Mercedes just to try and understand what's going on there, because since the summer break, there's been a clear shift in that Lewis has gone so far ahead of Valtteri, particularly in the qualifying performances, but even in the races. And I think I was struggling to understand whether it's Lewis who's raised his game or is Valtteri struggling, and fundamentally, I think the Mercedes this year has been a tricky car to drive. But they were saying that Lewis has arrived with a much more cerebral attitude. He's really thinking about the way he gets the car prepared for the qualifying laps. Not just thinking about the lap itself, but the prep lap, making sure that every individual corner of the car is in the right temperature window with the tires and the brakes, and not just for the first corner of the qualifying lap, but making sure he's got tires available to attack the final sector of the lap. And I think this whole mental approach to making sure he's in the right zone, and the tires and the cars in the right zone, is really paying dividends for him. And you know, he's unquestionably the king of qualifying at the moment. And Sebastian did a good job to get himself on the front row. They had a tough Friday, had to change the chassis overnight, which isn't a small job. So, you know, it was a big job for them. But he managed to dig it out and get himself on the front row. Daniel Ricciardo did a good job in qualifying to get within half a second. And if you look at it in the lap time comparisons, you know, they do lose good 5-6 tenths in straight line speed. So I think once again the Red Bull had very good pace around here, and it's a shame the engine problem put him out of contention. I mean, Max showed that until that whole little battle towards the end, he had dragged himself up from the back of the grid basically to within 12 seconds of Lewis, and that just showed once again that he and Red Bull had great race pace, as they showed in Japan, as they showed in Malaysia, and really, you know, I wish they're able to dig it out when it comes to qualifying, and that's a Renault thing more than a Red Bull thing, I think, at the moment. Who else? Carlos Sainz, absolutely stellar debut with his new team. You know, settled in so quickly. I think they were surprised. I think even he was surprised, frankly, how quickly he settled in. I got to spend a bit of time with him and his dad over the weekend, and they were really happy with the environment, and said that the people in the team really you know, welcomed him well, and you know, have a high amount of respect for him, and he delivered, and you know, it fully justified the move that Cyril Abiteboul and Alain Prost at Renault did to drop Jolyon and bring him in, because you know, they needed a guy who's going to score points in the second car, and Carlos has done it straight off the bat. You know, he could have maybe caught Ocon, but I think ultimately the Force India was just a bit too quick, particularly in straight line. You know, the Mercedes power, you know, they just crank up the power. They use the energy saving in strategic ways to make sure that they've got enough power to pull away down the start-finish straight, for example, or the back straight with the DRS. So, you know, I don't think Carlos really ever had a chance to get him there. Who else? Brendan Hartley, we should talk about. Grand Prix debut. It's a tall order to come in, having never driven the current generation F1 car. I know from driving one of these cars earlier this year that they are quite different in the engine characteristics and the complexities of getting the tires, you know, in the right window and things like that. They're very complex cars, and I think he did a very respectable job. You know, with every set of new tires that they gave him, he found big chunks of lap time. And I think, though, Kvyat raised his game. It's almost, you know, he recognizes he's got one last chance to fight for his Formula One career, and he delivered a really strong weekend, probably one of the strongest we've seen from him. So he's given Red Bull a slight, and Helmut Marko a slightly complicated headache. What do? Do they look at the short-term view, which is then keep Kvyat in the seat alongside Gasly for next week? Do they take a long-term view and say, well, Kvyat sort of, has he peaked? He's plateaued. He's had 2 or 3 years at it. We've sort of sacked him 2 or 3 times, and he's resurrected himself. Whereas Brendan Hartley is going to be on a massive upward learning curve, and he's just going to get better and better. So could he be the more long-term solution? I think there's a tricky debate going on there of what they want. For the team, having Hartley and Gasly will be difficult for them to have a benchmark, because effectively it's 2 rookies. So again, it's tricky as a short-term versus long-term view. So I think there's a few debates going on there. I don't think it's an easy problem for them to solve, because Hartley did a good job as well this weekend. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. Anyway, it's a very short hop off to Mexico next week. So a couple of days here in Austin. It's such a great city. So I'm going to head out for a run, and I will see you all next week from Mexico. All right.